Oh, welcome back. And the subject of the talk today and the demonstration, the live demonstration, is going to be Kalman filters. And it's not very often that you'll see a real demonstration of a Kalman filter. And mostly you'll see simulations in MATLAB, so it's quite an event. And my own experience with Kalman filters go back right to about 1978 when I first learned about them at college, and then later when I researched them as a young PhD student and so on. Back in those days, of course, we too had never seen the real thing working. It was all done in simulations on mainframe computers. So things have really changed a lot in this time with embedded systems, and even hobbyists are using Kalman filters. Now for this talk, you're going to need a little bit of background theory on things like state space, so I can't explain everything in the short period of time, but hopefully you can pick up the other things later, at a later point of time. So this is the man himself here on the left. This is Rudolph Kalman, the famous originally Hungarian engineer who came up back in the early 60s with the Kalman filter. The reason I'm putting right next to him this other picture, this is Norbert Wiener. I spent a lot of time working on his kind of stuff as well. He predated Kalman. The only difference between the theories is that the Kalman theory is really an extension of the Wiener theory. Norbert Wiener, child prodigy, his work involved separating signals from noise, but they were all stationary signals. That's signals where the noise doesn't change with time, and none of the if you like, the parameters in the model don't change either. Whereas Rudolph Kalman's work can look at time variant systems and non-stationary systems, provided you know how these things vary. So he's a real founding father, and so was Wiener as well. So the Kalman filter, the way we're going to look at it, I mean, depends on the background that you're coming from, but I'm looking at it from a control systems point of view today, rather than purely signal processing, although it is signal processing as well. And in control systems, we use it as a state observer. In other words, we estimate the states of the system, and then we feed them back using whatever methods. Can be optimal control, for example, or some other method. So for example, in many mechanical systems, we could estimate the position and the velocity of an object. Often this is done in space vehicles and so on. That's why in the early days, most of us never saw how these things were being implemented, because they happened in the space race if you worked in missiles and guidance systems and so on. And they were very expensive systems with gyros on them, cost a great deal of money. So the Kalman filter is a state estimator, and I've got a very good application which is incredibly cheap. But as I say, the Wiener filter and the Kalman filter are closely related, and the Wiener filter, if you leave the Kalman filter on for a short period of time, it converges to the Wiener filter. That's provided everything's sort of fixed, the dynamics and the statistics of the noise. So this is what we call a stochastic system. This is continuous time, or analog, or whatever you want to call it. X dot of t equals ax plus bu plus d omega. The first part, x dot equals ax plus bu, is a normal linear time invariant system. As I say, in the Kalman theory, you can actually put a as a function of time if you wanted to, and b and so on, all these matrices, but here we assume they're constant. The d omega t is a noise term, and the noise term drives the system. In my particular application, there's no b term, there's actually just a d term, and the b term tends to be it's like a deterministic term, the bu, like for the control signal, but my control sets about 0, so it doesn't really have that problem. Then the output y equals cx plus v. The noise terms omega and v, they're considered to be 0 average. So zero average, and they've got covariance matrices Q and R. They have to be what's called positive definite, so we say Q is greater than 0, R is greater than 0. You can look that up if you like. These matrices are covariance matrices, but just for those of you that aren't familiar with what is positive definite, if you've got ordinary numbers, say like number 3, you can say 3 is greater than 0, of course, or it's negative. Minus 3 is less than 0, but if you've got a matrix, you can't really say the matrix is greater than 0. So instead we define this thing, a matrix is positive definite, negative definite, or positive semi-definite. So we can say here a matrix A is greater than 0, and the conditions are that if the element A11 is greater than 0, and the determinant itself, that's A11, A22 minus A12, A21 is greater than 0. Those are called, incidentally, the leading principal minors. If they're positive, the matrix is said to be positive definite, not positive as in a number, but positive definite. Okay, so a little bit of theory. Now, to state space, we're going to consider a discrete time system. I'm not going to continue much with continuous, although we'll come back to it, but in terms of implementation we're going to use discrete time because everything's done on computers now. So the discrete time state space model is here. Xk plus 1 equals, we call it F instead of A, xk plus del uk plus g omega, okay, and the output y equals hx of k plus v of k, where v and omega are the noise terms, white noise terms. They've got zero mean and particular variance, and you can get these matrices from the continuous time case with the f equals e to the at and those integrals. Now these can be found, you can either use MATLAB, and MATLAB uses a numerical method. So for example, that's how we used to do it 35 years ago or whatever. F equals e to the at, I equals I plus at in a power series. We'd program this on the old mainframe computers. Can't even remember oh yeah, that was called the phi del method, I seem to remember, because we didn't call it F, we call it phi, and I'm calling that one del anyway, but I've got another matrix as well, G, which drives the noise term. So we can quite easily nowadays, there's commands in MATLAB to get a discrete system. We need to know what the sampling interval is. Now I'm going to be sampling at 10 kilohertz for the examples used here, so t is 0.0001 of a second. So here's the MATLAB command. I've defined this thing J, which is a null matrix. That's necessary, that's like the D matrix in state space, and the reason I've called it J is because I'm using D for something else. That's the only reason. So we can, using the ordinary commands, define a system SYS. If we typed in A, B, C and D, find a sampling interval, and then find the discrete system here, C to D is called SYS and T. And you can look this up under MATLAB. Now, we're going to look at this example of a double integrator because that's very important, the double integrator system. Not because it's easy, but because it's relevant to sort of inertial dynamics and so on. So if we take the state space description of a double integrator, we can write its position and its velocity as the states x1 and x2. This simple form, the A matrix is very simple, 0, 1, 0, 0. The B is 0, 1. Or it becomes the D matrix vector or matrix if U is noise, and Y equals CX, where C is 1, 0. So we can type everything into MATLAB like that. Define A, B, notice the transpose over B, it's 0, 1 and then dashed to make it a column vector. And then we can discretize it using the C to D, and that's just information of how you would do it. And we come up with, you can also do it manually, and when you do it manually, using just integrating it and term by term using Laplace transforms, you come up with this interesting description here, which is That's the discrete time version. X k plus 1 is an x vector x1 and x elements x1 and x2, 1 t 0 1, and you got this t squared up in 2 over t, and so on. So that's the discrete version. Now, what is a Kalman filter? The Kalman filter, the way we use it, is actually a one-step ahead predictor. That's not to say that all Kalman filters are one-step ahead predictors, but rather that the simplest one to use is the one-step ahead predictor. I'll come back to that in a minute. Here's the Kalman filter. It's a model of the system. X hat, the hat means an estimate. K plus 1 equals f x hat k plus k times an error plus del u, if del exists at all, that is. In my case it's going to be 0. And then you define an error, y minus hx hat. And if you're wondering what does k stroke k minus 1 mean, that means the estimate of the vector k at time k given information up to time k minus 1. Likewise, x hat k plus 1 dash slash k means the estimate of the state at time k plus 1 given information up to time k. The vector, we actually get a vector for a simple case. It's just k1 and k2, and our job is to find k1 and k2. So how do we actually find k1 and k2? So the theory of the Kalman filter, which we're not really going to go into, we haven't got half a day, is as follows. You need to, and we can do this actually offline, it's not necessary to do it online. We iterate this equation, the one with the p, pk plus 1 equals fp f transpose plus gq g transpose, and so on. Iterate that round for as many times as you like, and then find k is the one above it. And you keep doing it until you get convergence. You have to start the p. P is known as the error covariance matrix, and k is known as the Kalman gain matrix or Kalman gain vector in a situation where there's only one input and output. And what will happen is the p converges to a constant value. Normally the trace of it, that's the sum of the diagonal elements, starts off big and then it converges quickly, maybe in a couple of hundred iterations or less, to a constant value, and then it just kind of stays there. So there's not much point in putting that in your real-time loop, because all that happens is if everything's constant, all your noise terms and the system terms, is that p just converges to a constant value, and then you're just pointlessly iterating that. So therefore you should put this outside the main loop of your program, so it's not taking up any valuable time processing. Okay. If, however, the statistics change with time for some reason, and you know how they change with time, which isn't a simple thing to know, then you could put that. You'd have to put that in the real. There are applications where that is possible in GPS systems, where you can actually get a reading of the noise variance, and therefore it is worthwhile to do that. But in our application, the noise is going to be the same. There is another form of that you'll see a lot in the of the Kalman filter, which is a predictor-corrector form. You can see it's a little bit more complicated. It's got x hat at k given k minus 1, that's our predictor. But then it's got x hat at k given k. That means the estimated time of the state at time k, given information up to time k, and then it's equal to x hat k, that's the predicted state, k given k minus 1. Plus, and notice I've changed k to kf here, because kf is slightly different. It hasn't got an f term in front of it, it's pH transpose and so on. And now, why would you bother? Well, the reason is that if you use this formulation, x hat at k given k, it gives you a slightly smaller mean square error with the expense of more computation than it would if you used the predicted form. But most people use the predicted form, and I'm not going to use this version either. So let's look at a real example. So if we go down here, this is this little device here that you may have seen before is the small, I think it's MPU 650, I think, or 6050 accelerometer and gyro. It's called 6-axis because it's got 3 for the accelerometer and three accelerometers and 3 gyros on the XYZ plane in 3 dimensions. And you kind of should be able to know within reason where you are. So this is the pitch, let's say. Oops, if I define that as the pitch, and that is the roll, and that's the heave, and that's the yaw. Let's say that. You can calculate various things. Let's take the accelerometer, for example. There are 3 accelerometers, X, Y, and Z. The Z is the vertical one, and the X and Y is the other 2. You can find the angle that it's orientated at using the arctan function. That's the arctan2 function, incidentally, where you use all the quadrants. And it's just given by the Y reading over the square root of Z squared plus X squared. This is often quoted wrong on the internet in a few sites. They often put a square root of X squared plus Y squared plus Z squared. It's the square root of Z squared plus X squared. Then if you want the other one, the roll, for the roll, that's the pitch, theta P. If you want the roll, you have to put Rx there, and then that's Ry, the denominator. Why would we want such a device? Well, we can put it on, say, a sedgeway, and we can measure the angle that the sedgeway is leaning at for control systems, or some sort of robotics application, or an aircraft or something, a small model aircraft. The problem with these things is that individually the gyro and the accelerometers have got problems, but together they can kind of be alright. Let me just talk about the problems, in that this accelerometer, it can be kind of noisy at high frequencies. Slight little bumps and things can be sensitive to various vibrations and so on. And the gyro, which I haven't talked about, it suffers from drift because it gives out velocity, and to get position you have to integrate the velocity, and if you integrate anything with a tiny amount of DC on it, which happens, then the output becomes drift. So you get a constant offset, let's say, and then when you integrate that offset, it becomes big and the output drifts. So there's a problem there, that the low frequencies there are not good in the gyro, let's say, and the high frequencies aren't good in the accelerometer. We can take a double integrator and write it like this in state space. Notice the only difference is I put a minus sign instead of 0, 1, it's 0, minus 1. That's due to negative acceleration due to gravity. It's like if you've got a mass that's falling down from the sky, the force on it is it's not mg, it's minus mg. So that's the reason for that. That's a small point, but otherwise we've got this state space description in continuous time, or analog, 0, minus 1, 0, 0. That's the identity matrix for or D matrix, and it's, this Greek letters G and A over here are the process noise terms. It's a sort of random signals that are driving the gyro and the accelerometer. And we've got noisy observations, and this isn't identity, it's sort of reversed identity, it's 0, 1, 1, 0. So the output from the model is the gyro output for P. P means pitch, because we can do the same for roll, and it's 0, 1, so it's equal to omega p, and you can follow the equations through, and you actually see that you get the gyro out, gyro signal out plus noise, and the acceleration angle out plus noise, 2 different noises. So we're modelling 2 different noise sources there. And something similar to that is used in other models. I've used it slightly different in this one, but you'll see similar things. if I take the discrete time version of this, I get this angle, and again I get a minus t there due to the negative acceleration, and there's another minus over there, so it's a kind of complicated looking D matrix. The F matrix is just 1 minus t 0 1. There they are there. So that's our discrete time model. So once we've got this discrete time system, all we need to do is really plug them into the Kalman filter equations, and we've got our answer. The tricky bit has always been really getting these equations. It's not the Kalman filter part's really the simple part. You can just copy it down and program it up. You can even use MATLAB if you have to. You don't even have to program it yourself. Although I have done here, because it's not that hard to do. But it was a long time ago. We used to spend ages doing this sort of thing. So I've said actually analog, it can be continuous time. I'm going to find the analog Kalman filter. And the reason I'm going to do that first is because I want to get a feeling for what it is, because it's going to be a fixed filter, because it's stationary. So it's not really a Kalman filter, it's a Wiener filter that we're working out. But because it's estimating the state, we still call it the Kalman filter. So here's just arbitrarily I've made the Q covariance matrix for driving noise just unity. I've just normalized it. Doesn't matter what it is at the moment. And I've just made R diagonals 0.001. And again, there's no logic to that. I could make it anything I wanted, just to get a rough idea of what the filter here will look like. And once I've got an understanding of that, I can get a much deeper understanding of how this works. So I can call it the Wiener approach, but it's still using the Kalman equations. So in MATLAB we can calculate the transfer function, or manually we can do it. And first of all, we'll just work out the transfer function of the system. It's not a straight double integrator, as you can see. It's actually a multivariable system. That's a system with 2 inputs and 2 outputs. 2 inputs are the gyro random signal and the accelerometer random signal. There they are there. And the outputs are the pitch reading for the gyro and the angle reading for the accelerometer. That's from the arctan reading calculation. So this is our transfer function matrix. 0, 1 upon s, it's an integrator, 1 upon s, an integrator, minus 1 upon s squared, that's a minus double integrator. So that's our transfer function. And that would be interesting to see, and actually it does actually make sense, because that's if you integrate acceleration here, you get velocity. If you integrate this is velocity, you get position. You double integrate acceleration, you get position as well. If you work out its transfer function of the Kalman filter itself in MATLAB, let's say, we get this. It's interesting. So it's a matrix of transfer functions, or we call it a transfer function matrix. So there's 4 of them. And you notice the second order here. And then there's these 4 here. So it's like 4 transfer functions. If we take them one by one, that one's a kind of low pass filter when you divide it into there. That goes up at 20 dB per decade. Ignore the minus sign for the moment. And then this gets flattened off. Ignore the drilling sounds, that's making our new building. Here it's a second order again, it's a second order denominator and first order numerator, and likewise here. So these are low pass filters. So we can actually summarize that to say that the position estimate output is the low pass filtered gyro output minus the band pass filtered accelerometer. The band pass filter is this guy here, the S on the numerator, and so it goes up at 20 dB per decade and then down at minus 40 dB per decade, giving us a band pass filter. And the velocity estimate, so low pass filter minus the low pass filtered gyro output plus the low pass filtered accelerometer. So Now we're going to, oh, there's the equations. So we only implement these in real time. We don't do the Riccati equation. That's done before we go into the main loop. So we iterate that in real time. I don't do the predictor corrector thing. There's not much point in doing that. That's it. Let's do the real thing now. So here's the myRio, of course, because it's brilliant for this kind of thing, because it does full floating point, it handles real time, it's even got FPGAs if you need that kind of computing power, and the small device that does our inertial navigation type thing. It's an accelerometer, and the gyro is built into one. So I'm going to go, and there's my main program here. I'm going to kick it up. I'm going to move it over to the screen. There it is. And what am I looking at here? It's just about to run. These are my various matrices. I'll actually take you through the program first before I show you it running. So here's the program over here. It's kind of big, but some of this stuff isn't mine. That's just for defining the I2C interface for the device. But here is where I define my matrices in this little block here. I'm using the matrix command in VIs, if you like, in MATLAB. So I'm defining my H matrix, my G matrix, and my F matrix, and my Q and an R. Once I've done that, I need to solve the Riccati equation. That's done in a loop. This loop here goes round about a couple of hundred times. Again, it's all matrices, solving that equation that we just looked at. And we get out of it the steady-state Kalman predictor gain and the steady-state P matrix, but we use that in calculating the gain, but we're only really interested in the Kalman predictor gain matrix. And that goes into our main loop, and this thing gives us three outputs for the accelerometer: the X, Y and the Z readings for the accelerometer, and the X, Y and Z readings for the gyros down here. I've actually trimmed them a bit to try and get rid of offsets, and the Kalman filter itself is there, which is actually very simple because it's with a loop within a loop. There it is, that's all it is. That's the x hat k plus 1 equals fx hat k plus k times the error. There's the error. The error is called the innovations. In this case it's an innovations vector. Innovations is a big subject in its own right. That's called the new information in the Kalman filter. I think it was invented originally. The idea was invented by Wiener, but or Kalman, I'm not sure which. Probably Kalman actually, not Wiener. Makes more sense that he did it. And then I'm going to display it in various ways. So back to the real program. And what you'll see here is when the switch here is off, there's no Kalman filter. So what I'm going to do is put the orientation so it's close to down here, so it's sort of flat. That's so that the pitch should be close to 0, and then when I move it up, that'd be 90 degrees, 0 and minus 90 if I had to. So this could be part of a sedge wave, for example. Put it flat. You'll see that the accelerometer is quite noisy. That's the accelerometer here in the middle, and you see how it's jumping about even when I'm trying to be quiet. It's still around. It should be sitting around about 0. Just slightest movement and it's away. And that's the angle. It's like minus 2 degrees. It's not quite so bad. That's coming from the gyro, but it's still a little bit noisy. And I've got my horizon thing here, which I've used before, and it tells me it's just an indication, like in an aircraft which is flat. So it's not too bad actually. That's without, but you can see it jitters about a bit because of noise. You wouldn't want that kind of jitter in some big mechanical device. So I'm going to switch on I'm just wondering, it might even be picking up my voice there. Switch the Kalman filter on, and you see, watch how quickly that dies out and smoother the velocity becomes. And likewise, which is sitting at 2 degrees, I think it is. Oops, there's -2. It's just the orientation. Tried to get it at 0, but it's not going to 0, so that's the Kalman filter on. It should be, so there's much less noise. So this is the angle, and that's the velocity. Turn it on, turn it off, on and off. So this is a Wiener filter, or a Wiener Kalman, steady state Kalman filter. Now watch as I tilt this. Oh, it's still not, sorry, I have to put the Kalman filter on. So there's the Kalman filter on. Now watch the difference. You see how well damped it is. Put it at 45 degrees. Let it go down to 0. Down it goes. Beautifully damped. It doesn't bounce about or anything. Let's put it at 90. It's almost spot on there, isn't it? So -90. So if you were going to, that's me moving it now in space, I sort of move it around like that, you can see it moving here. I can't show both at the same time, too far away from one another. Now why would you need this? Well, you can take the angular position here and the velocity, and you could, these are two states, and you can feed them back, position and velocity. You've got state feedback straight away. So that would avoid having to do a phase advance, because when you do velocity, that's like rate feedback, and you know, gyros are known for rate feedback, so that provides you with damping in a control system if you can feed back the derivative. But you don't differentiate anything because it's too noisy, but the Kalman filter produces that signal. So the beauty of this is there is no integration, because if you use a pure integrator to get from one signal to another, so let's say from velocity to position, any DC, the output will drift. So that's why you want to avoid integrators at all costs, certainly an open loop. I mean, there is an integrator in the Kalman filter, but there's feedback around the whole thing, so it's a kind of integrator. So that's you can do the same for the roll and whatever, and you've got before you know it, you're sort of halfway there to an inertial guidance system for some kind of quadcopter or something. I did trim off the offsets, because when you buy these things, they come off the production line, they're not all the same, so you do need to trim off, you know, to get them to 0. The velocity might not be 0, so you need to sort of do a little bit of pre-calibration, but that's quite minor, so that, for example, when it's lying flat, you know, that line would be close, absolutely 0, and the velocity here would be at 0, and the angle would be at 0, let's say there. So there we have it. Very, very quickly gone through Kalman filters and an application, showing you the whole thing. As I say, you don't see that very often. Lots of gaps there, if you like, in the knowledge, I accept that. But other than spending hours going through it, there was no other way. So it's a bit of a express talk, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.